Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into the world of Kubernetes. You know, that open source platform that has everyone talking.
It really does.
So whether you're, getting ready for a big meeting or maybe exploring some new tech or just, curious, we're going to break down how some real companies are actually using Kubernetes
Yeah.
to solve some pretty big challenges.
Yeah, and we have some exciting case studies. We've got AppDirect, Babylon, and Booking.com. And their experiences will really give you a sense of the power of Kubernetes. Think like 10 times growth in engineering teams or deployments that go from hours to just minutes. It's really remarkable.
Okay, you've got me hooked. Let's start with AppDirect. They're a cloud commerce platform, and they hit a wall trying to deploy new features because their application architecture was, a bit of a monolith. And as if that wasn't enough, their engineering team was exploding. They needed a serious infrastructure upgrade.
They did, and that's where Kubernetes came in. Around 2016, AppDirect made the leap and transitioned to a microservices approach. So they broke down their big application into smaller independent services, each running in its own container. Imagine switching from a giant cruise ship to like a fleet of speedboats. So much more agile and maneuverable.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see the picture here. So how did this microservices approach, combined with Kubernetes, actually change things for AppDirect?
Well, their deployment time went from a painful 4 hours down to just a few minutes. Imagine how that changed their ability to release new features and respond to their customers' needs.
That's huge. I bet the developers were over the moon.
Yeah.
But a few minutes for deployment, and what did that mean for their actual output?
Well, their weekly deployments jumped from maybe 30 to a crazy 1,600. And to manage all of this, they brought in monitoring tools and embraced self-service for their developers. So this meant that developers could deploy their own code without having to rely on a separate operations team, which sped things up even more.
Wow, that is seriously impressive. So from what I'm gathering, Kubernetes let AppDirect scale without getting bogged down by all that growth. Yeah. And the developers had the freedom to innovate. And deployments were lightning fast. That's a pretty powerful combination.
You got it. Now let's switch gears to Babylon, a healthcare AI innovator. And they faced a different problem. Not enough computing power for their complex AI experiments, plus they were planning to expand globally, which meant they needed a solution that could work across different regions seamlessly.
Yeah, that's a tall order. How did they tackle that?
Well, they were already using Kubernetes, which gave them a great foundation to build on. So they built a self-service AI training platform using Kubeflow, which is specifically designed for machine learning. Now, this smart move ensured data locality, meaning that their data stayed in the region where it was needed, which is important for both performance and regulatory reasons.
Data locality. That makes a lot of sense, particularly in healthcare where regulations can be pretty strict. But how did this new platform change things for Babylon's AI teams?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. They saw this huge drop in the time it took to validate their clinical AI models, from 10 hours down to under 20 minutes.
Wait, 10 hours to 20 minutes? That's not just an improvement, that's warp speed. What was the impact of all that saved time?
It was enormous. This faster validation process not only helped their international expansion, but also empowered their data scientists to experiment and innovate way faster.
It's amazing to see how they leveraged this technology to make such a big impact. Ready to look at our third case study?
Yeah, let's do it. This time we're checking out Booking.com. And while they initially had some success using OpenShift, which is basically a prepackaged version of Kubernetes, they realized it created this knowledge bottleneck for their developers. It's like having a fancy kitchen appliance that only a few people know how to use.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a problem. So what do? Rip out the fancy appliance and start from scratch?
Not quite. They went ahead and built their own custom Kubernetes platform using the core open source project. And they encouraged their developers to learn Kubernetes directly. And fostered a culture of knowledge sharing. It was like, okay, team, let's all become Kubernetes masters together.
I love that approach. Empowering your developers is so important. So what were the results of this hands-on approach with Kubernetes?
Well, it just unleashed this wave of innovation. Developers at Booking.com could finally use the full power of Kubernetes. And the time it took to create new services plummeted from days or weeks down to just 10 minutes.
10 minutes. It's incredible how embracing open source and empowering developers led to such a big change. And we've heard a lot about what Kubernetes can do, but before we keep going, let's take a step back for a second.
Right.
We need to define exactly what Kubernetes is and why it matters so much.
You're right.
So for anyone who's new to this, Kubernetes is an open source platform for automating the deployment, scaling, and management of containerized applications.
Think of containers as lightweight packages. that have everything an application needs to run. And Kubernetes is like an orchestra conductor, making sure all those containers work together perfectly.
And it's not just some new technology. It's built on Google's experience running these massive workloads, so it's battle-tested and ready for anything. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What are the key benefits of Kubernetes? Why should anyone care?
Well, first off, Kubernetes guarantees high availability. This means your applications are always up and running, even if individual servers fail. It's like a safety net that stops downtime and keeps your users happy.
That's so important in today's world. No one wants to see that website down message, so high availability is a big win. What else?
Scalability is another big one. Kubernetes makes it easy to scale your applications up or down to deal with changing demand. Let's say you suddenly have a ton more traffic. No problem. Kubernetes can just automatically spin up more containers to handle it.
So it's like having an elastic infrastructure that grows and shrinks when you need it.
Exactly.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Any other benefits we should highlight?
Well, portability is a big one. With Kubernetes, you can deploy and manage your applications across all sorts of different environments, whether it's your own data center, a public cloud provider like AWS or Azure, or even a hybrid setup. This gives you the freedom to choose the best infrastructure for your needs without being stuck with any one vendor.
Flexibility, scalability, high availability. Those are some serious advantages. No wonder Kubernetes is getting so much attention. Now, before we get too deep into the technical details, I'd love to hear from you, our listeners. What are your thoughts on Kubernetes so far? Have you used it in your own work, or are you just beginning to explore it?
We want to hear from you. Leave us a comment and tell us about your experiences and questions, or even suggest some future deep dive topics you'd like us to cover. And if you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to subscribe and give us a like. It really helps us reach other curious people like you. But for now, let's get back to the world of Kubernetes. Okay, so we've talked about high availability, scalability, portability. But how does Kubernetes actually do all of that? Let's break down some of its key features and how they translate into real-world benefits.
Yeah, let's unpack those features. I'm really interested in how Kubernetes handles deployments and rollouts, making sure new versions of applications are released smoothly without any hiccups.
That's a great question. Kubernetes is really good at automating those deployments and rollouts. Think of it like a stage manager orchestrating this seamless transition between acts in a play. Kubernetes can gradually introduce changes to your application while it's monitoring how healthy it is. And if something goes wrong, it can automatically roll back the changes. That way you can avoid any major disruptions.
So it's like a safety net for your deployments.
Yeah.
Making sure there's a smooth transition and minimizing any downtime. That's got to be a huge relief for developers, especially when they're releasing those complex updates.
Absolutely. It takes away so much of the stress and risk of deploying. Now, another critical part of any distributed application is how the different parts talk to each other. This is where service discovery and load balancing come in.
Right. You can't have all these independent services running around without a way for them to find and talk to each other.
Exactly. Kubernetes handles that beautifully. It automatically gives IP addresses to containers and provides a single DNS name for a set of containers that do the same thing. This makes it super easy for different parts of your application to connect and communicate.
So like a built-in phone book for your application, making sure everyone can find the right contact.
That's a great way to put it. And what's even cooler is this DNS name can be used to distribute traffic across multiple instances of your application, so no single instance is overwhelmed with requests. And it helps prevent those bottlenecks.
Like having a traffic cop directing requests to different servers, keeping everything flowing smoothly. So Kubernetes is handling deployments, communication, traffic management. What about storage?
Kubernetes has got you covered there too. It can automatically mount whatever storage system you want, whether it's local storage, a public cloud provider, or a network storage system.
So developers have a lot of flexibility when it comes to choosing the best storage option. They don't have to be tied to a specific provider or technology.
Exactly. And speaking of smooth operations, one of Kubernetes' best features is its self-healing ability.
Self-healing? That sounds almost magical. How does that work?
It really is amazing. If a container fails for whatever reason, Kubernetes can automatically restart it. And if a whole node, which is like a physical or virtual server, goes down, Kubernetes can reschedule those containers to healthy nodes. It's constantly working behind the scenes to make sure your application stays up and running.
It's like a built-in immune system for your infrastructure.
Yeah.
Constantly fighting off threats and keeping everything healthy.
That's a great analogy. And it goes even further than just restarting containers. It also keeps track of how healthy they are. If a container isn't responding the way it should, Kubernetes will shut it down. And it won't let it serve traffic again until it's healthy.
Wow, so it's like Kubernetes is a quality control manager, making sure only those healthy containers are serving your customers.
Precisely. And here's another feature that's really important these days with all the focus on security: secret and configuration management.
Okay, now that sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Well, with Kubernetes, you can securely store sensitive info like passwords or API keys, and you can make changes to your configuration without rebuilding your entire container image.
So it's a way to manage sensitive data and configuration settings without compromising security or disrupting your application.
Exactly. This is super important for apps that need to be updated frequently and use sensitive data. Remember how AppDirect's engineering team was growing so quickly?
Yes, they scaled their team tenfold thanks to Kubernetes.
Right. Well, one of the ways Kubernetes supports that kind of growth is with a feature called automatic bin packing.
Automatic bin packing. I'm picturing robots perfectly organizing boxes in a warehouse.
That's not a bad way to think about it.
Yeah.
Kubernetes automatically places containers onto your nodes based on what resources they need and any constraints you set. It's like a super efficient Tetris game, figuring out how to fit everything together perfectly.
Optimizing those resources and making sure everything runs as smoothly as possible.
Exactly. And it's not just about packing containers. It also takes into account different workloads. You can mix critical and best effort workloads, so you can make the most out of your resources and save money in the process.
So Kubernetes helps optimize your infrastructure and keeps costs down. I can see why this is so exciting.
Yeah, it's a game changer. And we haven't even talked about how it handles batch and CI workloads, automatically replaces failed containers, and makes horizontal scaling a breeze.
Wait, horizontal scaling. Remind me what that is again.
Horizontal scaling basically means adding or removing instances of your application to handle changes in demand. Let's say you suddenly get a ton of traffic. Kubernetes can automatically spin up more instances of your app to handle it. And when things calm down, it scales back down to save resources.
Wow, that level of automation is amazing. It's like it knows what you need before you even realize you need it.
That's the beauty of a well-designed orchestration platform. And another feature that shows how forward-thinking Kubernetes is its support for both IPv4 and IPv6 addressing.
So it's ready for the future of the internet.
Exactly. And maybe the most important thing about Kubernetes is its extensibility.
Extensibility. What does that mean when we're talking about Kubernetes?
It means you can add new features to your cluster without changing the original code. You can customize Kubernetes to do exactly what you need and integrate it with other tools and services.
So it's incredibly versatile. Companies can tailor it to their specific needs and workflows.
Exactly. That combination of robust core features and this incredible extensibility is what makes Kubernetes such a powerful and adaptable platform.
Kubernetes really does have it all. It's like the Swiss Army knife of container orchestration. We've covered a lot of ground today in this deep dive into the world of Kubernetes. From real-world case studies to its inner workings, it's been a pretty fascinating journey. But before we sign off, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned, and more importantly, what it means for you.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw how companies like AppDirect, Babylon, and Booking.com have used Kubernetes to overcome some pretty big challenges. But even beyond those specific cases, there are some key takeaways that apply to anyone working with PEC today.
So let's boil it down. What are the core messages our listeners should take away from this deep dive?
One of the most impressive things about Kubernetes is how it empowers developers. It gives them the tools and the automation they need to build, deploy, and scale applications with incredible speed and efficiency. Remember, AppDirect's jump to 1,600 deployments per week. That's the power of Kubernetes in action.
Right, and that dramatic reduction in deployment time. Booking.com going from days or weeks down to just 10 minutes. It's clear that Kubernetes can be a game changer for any company that wants to be more agile and get new features out to users faster.
Absolutely. And along with that agility comes scalability. Kubernetes makes it so easy to adapt to those changes in demand. Whether it's a sudden burst of traffic or a gradual increase in users, this elasticity helps you optimize resource utilization. So you're not overspending on infrastructure, but you're still able to handle those spikes in activity.
So you get the best of both worlds, efficiency and responsiveness. And of course, we can't forget about reliability. Kubernetes' self-healing capabilities, automated rollouts and rollbacks, and emphasis on high availability, all of that leads to a more stable and resilient infrastructure.
Exactly. Downtime can be really expensive for businesses, and Kubernetes gives you these powerful tools to minimize that risk. It's like a built-in safety net that keeps your applications running smoothly, even when something unexpected happens.
And beyond those core benefits, we also saw how Kubernetes can encourage innovation. By giving developers a platform that's flexible, portable, and easy to manage, it frees them up to focus on what they're best at. building and experimenting with new ideas. Babylon's AI platform is a perfect example of how Kubernetes can provide that foundation to push the boundaries of what's possible.
Absolutely. And being an open source platform adds even more value to Kubernetes. You're not tied to a specific vendor. You have access to this huge and active community of users and developers. And the platform is constantly evolving and getting better. It's a win-win.
So given all these benefits and all the different ways we've seen it used, I'm curious to hear from you, our listeners. How do you see Kubernetes fitting into your own work or your projects? What challenges are you facing that Kubernetes might be able to solve?
We really want to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment and share your experiences or your questions, or even suggest some future deep dive topics you'd like us to cover. And if you found this episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe and like it. It really helps us connect with more curious minds like yours.
We're always on the lookout for new ways to explore the world of technology. So until next time, keep diving deep and keep learning